Joining us now, MS Now senior investigative reporter Carol Leonnig, who was first to break this story. Brendan Ballou, former federal prosecutor and former lawyer with the DOJ National Security Division. Paul Butler is former federal prosecutor, professor at Georgetown School of Law, and an MS Now legal analyst. So, Carol, give us a sense of exactly who these officials are and why they left.
Chris, last night we learned and were able to confirm that at least 4, and now we are hearing possibly 5, senior leaders of the criminal section of the Civil Rights Division resigned in frustration over the failure of their office, in their view, to actually defend the constitutional rights of all Americans. Part of the concern for several of them, we were told, was the department's titular head basically saying we're not investigating the use of force in the ICE officer who fatally shot Renee Good in Minnesota. This was disturbing to many in the Department of Justice, but particularly to those in this criminal section, which has the duty of investigating and normally does investigate all fatal shootings by federal officers to determine, is there evidence that the use of force was appropriate? Was it legal? Was it inappropriate and therefore a violation of an American's civil rights? There are a lot of concerns about this shooting, especially because the vice president and the president both, within 24 to 48 hours of the shooting, declared the shooting justified without any probe at all.
So, Brendan, is there a fair argument that the core function of this division is not happening by not doing an investigation?
Absolutely. This is the sort of thing that this section would be investigating. There are all sorts of incentives in what's called the Justice Manual, essentially the operating playbook for the entire Department of Justice, for this office to be involved. So it's pretty unusual that the office seems to be indifferent to investigating the officer in this case. I think what makes it even more extraordinary is that the Department of Justice in general seems to have an active hostility to pursuing charges or even an investigation into the officer here. There's some reporting suggesting that this is being investigated not as a civil rights violation against Ms. Good, but as an assault on a federal officer by the ICE agent who shot her. You add on top of that the fact that the DOJ is refusing thus far to cooperate with state officials in an investigation. We're really in uncharted territory right now.
So, Paul, in the days after that deadly shooting, the assistant AG who decided against an investigation retweeted a post on X in which a prosecutor warned people not to ram ICE officers because they will use deadly force. And back in April, following an exodus of civil rights attorneys, she said the job here is to enforce the federal civil rights laws, not woke ideology. Are these just on their face unusual actions for an assistant AG?
They are the opposite of enforcing civil rights in the way that that concept has traditionally been understood. For the Attorney General to shut out the experts on her own staff from the investigation of Renee Good's death seems of a piece with DOJ and the FBI excluding the Minnesota state authorities from this investigation. That agency also has deep expertise in these kinds of cases. So it raises the suspicion that DOJ's motive here isn't to enforce civil rights or for a search of truth or an evidence-based analysis of what happened to Ms. Good. It sounds like the Department of Justice is trying to reinforce what the president and the vice president and the Secretary of Homeland Security said, which essentially is that Ms. Good is responsible for her own death. And Chris, they sound like they don't need no stinking investigation because they already know what happened.
Well, Brendan, I spoke last hour to former Trump White House attorney Ty Cobb, and here's what he had to say about this decision from the Civil Rights Division not to investigate the ICE shooting.
The fact that Harmeet Dillon and Pam Bondi refused to do so is a clear indication of, the authoritarianism that has now permeated the Justice Department, where they really are there to protect their own, It's not justice for all. It's justice for anybody who's an enemy of the Trump administration or injustice, as the case is with both the Minnesota shooting, Jerome Powell, Comey, Letitia James, and others.
Do you see a change in the core mission, Brendan? Is it protect us, protect our people, as opposed to protect the American people?
Absolutely. The Department of Justice is showing that it seems only interested in following the law and investigating enemies of this administration for the most part. You look at the fact that, obviously the Department of Justice has gone over named political enemies like James Comey, Tish James, John Bolton, now Jerome Powell, at the very same time that it is dismantling the Civil Rights Division. Approximately 75% of the staff has left that. The Public Integrity Section, which goes after corrupt government officials, and so much of the infrastructure for going after rich criminals. They are reportedly dismantling the Tax Division. They've dismantled the Klepto Capture Task Force and the Crypto Task Force. All of which is to say that this administration really has a very selective interest in who the law applies to.
So, Paul, the Wall Street Journal has new reporting that President Trump has repeatedly complained to aides about Attorney General Pam Bondi. Administration officials and other people familiar with his complaint say Trump's described her as weak and ineffective. What does this tell you about what Trump wants from his attorney general that she's not already doing? Because, on the surface, it seems like she's been trying to follow his directions.
What more could he want from an attorney general? It seems that she would be the attorney general of his dreams. She essentially marches to his orders, whether it's prosecuting James Comey, when the experienced prosecutors on her staff say that it shouldn't be brought, whether it's going after other folks who are Trump's enemies. And in this case, where, again, she's excluding the people with the most expertise from investigating the shooting of Ms. Good. So we know that when he tweeted that or put on social media that she needed to act with regard to James Comey and Adam Schiff and his other enemies, that was a mistake. He intended to send that just to her, but he accidentally posted that for the world to see. So maybe he's given her other marching orders that might be a bridge too far, even for her. But based on what we do know, it's really hard to see why he would have any problems with her. The American people should have a problem. The rule of law is in great jeopardy, as our Justice Department norms. But from all we can see, she's doing everything she can to protect her client, who she appears to believe is Donald Trump and not the United States.
Carol, we only have a minute left, but to have a functioning rule of law, you have to have a functioning DOJ, right? And now you're saying potentially 5 senior people have resigned. I wonder, in the conversations that you've been having, for you and Ken to report this story, could it keep going? What is the level of frustration there?
It's so high. It's hard to really even bring to all the readers, without hurting sources, how desperate people are to either leave or burrow in to hide, essentially, to protect their pensions, their health care, their income that is so they're so reliant on. But people are giving that up and risking a lot because they don't want to comply with the Department of Justice that doesn't care about civil rights. Harmeet Dillon, the Assistant Attorney General, has been incredibly clear. Believe her when she says she does not believe in most of the mission of the Civil Rights Division. She has spelled out why she thinks it's annoying to bother law enforcement agencies about potential abuse of force. This is something this division used to look into, whether police forces were serially abusing their civilians' rights in searches, in seizures, in traffic stops. She says that's too annoying for her department to do. But it's much broader than that. And I know you told me to be quick, Chris. I apologize. But it's so much broader than that. Every day almost, I hear from someone who's either a source or someone who's been reading and watching our coverage who says, I finally found a job outside the Department of Justice. I hate to leave, but I have to. It just is a routine thing. And we as Americans need to take seriously the warnings from these people that America is less safe as Donald Trump pressures his attorney general and everyone below her to focus all of the Department of Justice's might on going after and prosecuting and ultimately, convicting individuals for whom evidence of a crime is slim to none.
Carol Leonnig, who I don't know if you heard Ty Cobb, he called out you and Ken Delanian as two of the best reporters he ever worked with, and he's worked with more than a few. Brendan Ballou, Paul Butler, thank you all